In the world of systems architecture, there is a concept we call the root of trust. It is the absolute bottom layer of the stack. Before the operating system loads, before the encryption keys are generated, before you open an app or send a message, there is the hardware, the silicon itself, the transistors. We build our entire digital civilization on the assumption that this hardware is neutral. We assume that a processor simply processes, that a memory chip simply stores, that the physics of the machine are objective. Because if that assumption is wrong, if the silicon itself has an agenda, then no amount of software encryption, no password, no VPN, and no firewall can save you if the root of trust is poisoned the entire tree. Every branch, every leaf, every fruit is poisoned with it. For the last 20 years, we have lived in a world of universal hardware. A smartphone built in Shenzhen could be sold in San Francisco, used in Moscow, and recycled in Budapest. It was a global standard. One device, one internet, one connected world. That era just ended. The headlines you are reading say that China, Russia, Turkey, and Hungary have issued a ban on iPhones for government officials. They cite security concerns. The media calls it a trade war. They call it tit for tat, economic retaliation. They are missing the signal. This is not about economics. This is not about tariffs. This is a declaration that the root of trust has fractured. It is an accusation that the most popular consumer device in history is not a phone, but a hardware-level surveillance node, a Trojan Horse made of glass and silicon. Whether there is actual spyware hidden inside is almost irrelevant to the system's analysis. The belief that it is there has just shattered the single most important protocol of the modern age, the interoperability of the global technology stack. We are witnessing the hard fork of human technology, and this fork does not lead to a software update. It leads to a silicon curtain that will divide the planet into two incompatible, mutually hostile operating systems. To understand why this ban is happening and why it is a systemic crisis rather than a political one, you have to understand the engineering of a modern smartphone. Most people think of spyware as a malicious app, a virus you download by mistake, something that lives in the software layer, something you can remove. But a systems architect knows that software is just a ghost in the machine. The machine is the master. The hardware is the ultimate arbiter of truth. If I control the hardware, I control the reality that the software sees. I can lie to the operating system. I can lie to the user. Accusation coming from these nations, and it is a technically plausible one, is that the spyware is not in iOS. It's not in the code that Apple shows the world or that security researchers can audit. It is in the firmware of the peripheral chips, the baseband processor, the power management unit, the secure enclave itself. These are all black boxes, proprietary chips with proprietary code that no one outside a select few engineers can ever inspect. Consider the baseband processor. This is the specialized chip that handles all cellular communication. It operates the radio, it talks to the cell towers, it has its own operating system, a small, highly privileged piece of software that runs 24 hours a day. Even when your main phone is off, it has direct access to the microphone, the GPS, the camera, and the main memory. And critically, it operates almost completely independently of the main CPU and the iOS operating system you interact with. If you wanted to build the perfect, undetectable surveillance tool, you wouldn't write a virus for iOS. You would compromise the baseband, you would etch a backdoor physically into the silicon pathways of that chip during manufacturing. A tiny microscopic circuit that wakes up when it receives a specific silent frequency or a unique encrypted SMS message. It could then activate the microphone, transmit location data, or even upload encrypted files, all without the main iOS ever knowing. It would bypass every software-level security feature. If such a vulnerability exists, it is invisible to the user. It is invisible to the antivirus software. It is the God mode of the device. China and Russia are not banning iPhones because they found a virus. They are banning them because they have concluded that the black box, the proprietary closed source hardware designed in California, manufactured by anonymous contractors, can no longer be trusted. They are applying a zero trust architecture to the physical world. They are saying, if we didn't design the chip, if we didn't fab the silicon, if we didn't inspect every layer of the manufacturing process, then we must assume the chip is a spy. This is a profound shift in geopolitical technology. It moves us from a world of innocent until proven guilty to a world of compromised until proven indigenous. And the engineering nightmare is this: they are right to be paranoid. In a closed source system, especially one with a global supply chain, trust is faith. And faith, as we've learned repeatedly, is no longer a valid security protocol in an era of geopolitical conflict and advanced cyber warfare. The technical possibility of a hardware backdoor is undeniable. Why is this happening now? Why issue this ban today when iPhones have been ubiquitous for years? The answer lies in the evolving concept of data exhaust and the creation of the digital twin. 10 years ago, a phone knew who you called. Today, a phone knows who you are. The modern iPhone is not just a communication device. It is a highly sophisticated, always-on biometric sensor suite. It maps the unique geometry of your face with Face ID. It records the unique cadence and inflection of your voice. It tracks your heart rate, your steps, your sleep cycles, your blood oxygen saturation. It knows your location to within 3 feet, 24 hours a day, even when you try to turn it off or disable GPS. This device creates a digital twin of its user, a perfect, real-time, constantly updated data shadow. For a private citizen, this is a privacy concern. For a government official, a diplomat negotiating sensitive treaties, a general planning military strategy, a nuclear scientist developing classified technology, or even a low-level bureaucrat with access to critical infrastructure codes. This is a catastrophic national security vulnerability. If a hostile actor or even friendly but ultimately rival state has access to the digital twin of a head of state, they don't need to listen to their calls. They can predict their behavior with chilling accuracy. They can see when the general's heart rate spikes at 3 a.m., indicating a crisis unfolding. They can see when the diplomat meets secretly with the dissident simply by correlating the GPS data of 2 phones in a private room. They can infer mood, stress levels, health status, and even psychological profiles from this constant stream of biometric data. This is metadata analysis at a scale that borders on precognition. It is signals intelligence of the highest order, extracted passively, continuously. The nations issuing this ban, China, Russia, Turkey, Hungary, they are all regimes with significant internal surveillance apparatuses. They understand the power of ubiquitous surveillance because they leverage it themselves against their own populations. They know exactly what can be done with this granular, continuous biometric data. They are looking at the iPhone and they see a device that streams this digital twin data back to servers that ultimately fall under US jurisdiction. Even with strong encryption, even with Apple's privacy promises, they are looking at the potential for compelled access by US intelligence agencies. It's a trust protocol failure from their perspective. This ban is a desperate strategic attempt to sever the data umbilical cord. It is an attempt to kill the digital twin before it can be weaponized against their own leadership class. But here is the systemic flaw in their plan. The modern world, and especially high-level governance, runs on these sensors and the information they provide. By removing these advanced communication and data gathering tools, they are effectively blinding their own officials. They are forcing them back to analog, less efficient, and often less secure methods of communication. And in an information war, deliberately choosing to go analog is a profound tactical disadvantage. This creates a brutal, to be secure from external surveillance, they must be disconnected. But to be effective in a modern, hyper-connected world, they must be connected. The choice is between isolation and vulnerability, and that choice will shape their future capabilities. They are, in essence, sacrificing information velocity for information sovereignty. For years, we've discussed the Splinternet as a theoretical future scenario, a dire prediction where the global internet breaks into regional incompatible pieces. This iPhone ban and the accelerating geopolitical forces behind it are the formal inauguration of the Splinternet. We are rapidly moving toward a global architecture defined by techno-nationalism. In this emerging global order, your nationality, your geopolitical alignment increasingly determines your fundamental technology stack. If you are in the Western Bloc, the US, Europe, Japan, Australia, you will primarily use the American stack. iOS, Android, Windows, NVIDIA chips, AWS servers. Your root of trust is located and managed by corporations and governments headquartered in Silicon Valley. If you are in the Eastern Bloc, led by China and Russia, with strong alignments in Central Asia, parts of the Middle East, and Africa, you will increasingly rely on the sovereign stack, Harmony OS, Baidu, Russian-made Elbrus processors, or Chinese-designed Lunxin CPUs, Huawei's 5G. Your root of trust is located in Beijing or Moscow. This is not just about different brands or consumer preferences. It is about fundamentally incompatible technical standards, diverging protocols, and fragmented data architectures. Imagine a world not far from now where a Chinese smartphone literally cannot connect to a Western 5G tower because the handshake protocols at the baseband level are designed to be mutually exclusive. Imagine a world where a critical business application developed in Budapest cannot seamlessly run on a phone in Paris because the underlying operating systems and cryptographic libraries have diverged too far. This is the Tower of Babel moment for the digital age. We are losing the universal language of technology. For 40 years, the incredible efficiency of the global economy was fundamentally driven by standardization. A developer could write code once and deploy it to billions of users worldwide. A factory in Taiwan could build a cutting-edge chip and sell it to every country on Earth. A researcher could share scientific data across borders, fostering collaborative innovation. Techno-nationalism systematically destroys that efficiency. It introduces massive systemic friction. It forces companies to build two of everything, two distinct supply chains, two entirely separate code bases, 2 compliance departments for fundamentally different regulatory regimes. It means double the R&D costs, double the manufacturing complexity. But for the nations issuing this ban, efficiency is no longer the primary goal. Sovereignty, control, and national security are the overriding objectives. They are willing to accept a slower, more expensive, less efficient internet and technology ecosystem as long as they hold the ultimate root access to their own digital kingdom. They are deliberately trading performance for control and interoperability for independence. And this ban is the explicit signal that they are ready and willing to make that trade, no matter the economic cost. They are telling their citizens and the world the convenience and efficiency of the iPhone is not worth the sovereignty of our data, our infrastructure, and our national security. This will create a profound innovation fork. The 2 technological hemispheres will stop cross-pollinating ideas, sharing research, and collaborating on global challenges. Scientific data sharing will freeze. The rate of human progress in critical areas, from AI to climate modeling, will inevitably slow down because the global brain has been functionally lobotomized, cut in half, isolated, and forced to operate independently. Now, we must look at the supreme, almost absurd irony of this situation. The systemic paradox: China is banning the iPhone for its government officials, but China builds the vast majority of the iPhone. This is the supply chain paradox. It is an Ouroboros, the mythical snake eating its own tail, a closed loop of self-inflicted damage. Apple's supply chain is not just in China. It is deeply and inextricably woven into the very fabric of the Chinese industrial economy. Millions of Chinese workers assembled these devices in massive factory cities like Zhengzhou. Thousands of Chinese factories, from rare earth refiners to glass manufacturers to tiny screw producers, supply the components. By banning the end product, China is, in effect, attacking its own manufacturing base, its own economic growth engines, and directly impacting the livelihoods of millions of its own citizens. This reveals the profound depth of the kernel panic within Beijing. The fact that the Chinese government is willing to accept and even actively encourage the economic fallout of hurting Foxconn City, the massive industrial complex that builds iPhones, tells you how seriously they take the perceived security threat. They have done the cold, hard calculus. They have decided that the data vulnerability and the loss of digital sovereignty outweighs the massive economic benefit derived from being the world's factory floor. But this also puts Apple, and by extension, every single Western tech giant, in an impossible, strategically vulnerable position. How do you manufacture a secure device, a device that becomes the root of trust for millions of users, in what you now perceive as a hostile or potentially compromised territory? If China believes the iPhone is a spy tool for the US and its allies increasingly believes the manufacturing process itself in China is a security risk for the iPhone. The US fears that the hardware Trojans I spoke of earlier are being inserted not by Apple engineers, but by state-sponsored actors during assembly or during component fabrication in Shenzhen or Taiwan. They fear kill switches, micro cracks, or deliberately weakened encryption implemented at the physical layer. So both sides are terrified of the same physical object for opposite and mutually reinforcing reasons. The lack of trust is universal. This situation forces the great decoupling of manufacturing. We are seeing Apple desperately trying to move production of its devices to India, to Vietnam. We are seeing governments like the US frantically pouring billions into building new sovereign chip fabrication plants in Arizona, in Ohio. They are trying to untangle the Gordian knot of the global supply chain. But supply chains are not shoelaces. They are complex, organic nervous systems built over decades with billions of microdependencies. You cannot simply rip them out and transplant them overnight. This transition will take a minimum of a decade and likely much longer. And during that decade, we will exist in a state of high friction. Prices for consumer electronics will rise dramatically. Shortages of critical components will become common. The just-in-time efficiency model, which drove so much global economic growth over the last 30 years, is dead. We are entering the era of just-in-case redundancy. And redundancy, in an engineering sense, is inherently expensive and slower. We are optimizing for resilience, not efficiency. This is a fundamental rewrite of the global economic operating system, and the costs will be borne by every consumer and every business. So where does this cascading failure, this fundamental fracturing of trust, ultimately lead us? If we cannot trust the hardware because it's made by our rivals, and they cannot trust our software because it's owned by our corporations, is the global system doomed to irreconcilable division? As an engineer, I always look for the structural solution, the architectural fix. If closed source and proprietary black boxes are the problem, the source of unresolvable distrust, then open source hardware must be the theoretical solution. In the software world, we largely solved the trust problem with open source. Linux powers the vast majority of the internet because anyone can read the code. There are no secrets. You don't have to trust the author. You just have to verify the code yourself or rely on a global community of auditors. We have never successfully done this with hardware at a mass scale. We treat chip designs like state secrets, locked behind billions of dollars of IP. But if the silicon curtain falls completely, the only viable way to build a functional bridge between East and West to establish a new root of trust may be truly open hardware architectures. Initiatives like RISC-V, an open standard instruction set architecture for processors, offer a glimpse of this future. A world where you can inspect the silicon design under a microscope and compare it to a publicly verifiable blueprint. A world where no single entity owns the fundamental physics of computation. However, that is a utopian engineering dream decades away, and it requires a level of international cooperation that seems increasingly impossible. The pragmatic reality, the actual trajectory we are on, is much darker. The reality is that we are entering a cold war of code. In this war, your phone is no longer just a personal device. It is a badge of geopolitical allegiance. It is a flag you carry in your pocket. If you are a businessman traveling from New York to Beijing, you will increasingly need to adopt digital hygiene protocols that border on espionage tradecraft. You will need a burner phone, an entirely separate device, running a different operating system, sourced from a different supply chain with no personal data. You will need to swap your digital identity at the border. You will step off the plane and enter a fundamentally different internet, a different digital reality with different facts, different apps, and different rules. The universal tech stack is gone. The dream of seamless global interoperability is over. The ban on iPhones by these four nations is not an isolated incident. It is the first domino in a much larger, more profound re-architecture of global technology. It sets a dangerous precedent. It normalizes the idea that any consumer technology, especially devices as intimate as a smartphone, is inherently dual use, both a tool of convenience and a potential weapon of espionage. Soon, We may see the West officially banning Chinese phones like Xiaomi or Huawei, not just from critical infrastructure, but from ownership by government officials, then by ordinary citizens. We may see digital visas or app store firewalls required to access certain parts of the global internet, depending on your geographic location. We are actively dismantling the metaphorical global village that technology built and are replacing it with a constellation of isolated, mutually suspicious digital fortresses. From a systems perspective, this is a profound tragedy. It represents a massive regression in human connectivity, collective intelligence, and collaborative problem solving. We are taking the most powerful network ever built, the human network, amplified by technology, and we are deliberately partitioning the hard drive. And as any computer scientist or economist will tell you, once you partition a hard drive, once you fragment a network, you dramatically reduce the total available space for innovation, for progress, and for shared understanding for everyone. The iPhone was more than just a consumer product. It was a powerful symbol. It was a physical manifestation of a globalized ideal, a world where a California design manufactured in China could be used by a Russian to call a friend in Turkey, a symbol of interconnectedness. When China, Russia, Turkey, and Hungary banned that device from their critical government operations, they didn't just ban a phone. They banned the philosophy of globalization. They declared the death of universal trust in technology. And in a system without trust, the only remaining effective protocol is absolute, often isolationist control. We must prepare ourselves, not just for higher prices or incompatible chargers, or even the inconvenience of digital dual citizenship. We must prepare for a future where the truth itself is incompatible across these digital divides. Because when we run on fundamentally different operating systems, we process data differently, we receive different information, we output different realities. The fissure has widened, the silicon curtain has fallen, and we are all now trapped on one side or the other, watching the digital world fracture piece by piece into incompatible fragments.